The wait is finally over! The second season of One Punch Man has finally arrived! Does the very first episode live up to the hype, or will a brand new production company and director be kryptonite for the superhero series? The epic superhero action returns in the hotly anticipated second season of One Punch Man. Guys, I think we can all agree that the very first season of One Punch Man is damn near perfect. It was an absolute massive hit. They totally caught lightning in a bottle with this series, and the wait for the second season has been torture. And as someone who doesn't read the One Punch Man manga, the wait for this season has been excruciating. But I honestly think the wait was worth it. There's been a lot of controversy behind the second season of One Punch Man. The fact that it now is going to be animated by a completely different production company, the first season done by Madhouse. And they did a fantastic job with that season, there's no doubt. But this season is going to be animated by JC Staff. And when they released the very first trailer for the season, people weren't too happy. Hell, that's sugarcoating it. People were straight up pissed off and were afraid that JC Staff was going to completely ruin the second season of One Punch Man. And on top of that, we have a brand new director for the season, so we're pretty much going with a complete and total new staff for the season. But I can honestly say, from the first episode alone, I don't think we need to be that worried. Does it look as good as the first season? No, not necessarily, but it doesn't look bad either. There's still a lot of amazing things to enjoy about this episode, and the good thing is, the story is just as entertaining as ever. The first episode of the second season immediately kicks off by reintroducing us to our two main characters from the series, Saitama, the most obnoxiously strong character in the world, and Genos, the superpowered cyborg. They're doing what all superheroes in this world do on their day off, which is basically just relaxing, going to the grocery store, and having a good old time. What's really great is they still manage to capture the perfect essence of Saitama and Genos, with Saitama being basically just bored with everything in his life. You can see it all over his face, and Genos, who constantly has dreams of becoming incredibly stronger and learning from his superpowered master. But the bulk of this episode is actually a reintroduction to the character of King, the self-proclaimed strongest hero in the world. Immediately in the first season, they made him seem like he was going to be kind of a big deal, and he has a really cool design. He's just a super big, tall, jacked dude with 3 badass scars going across his face, and just like Genos and Saitama, King is on his day off and he's walking down the street when suddenly the city is attacked by a giant monster. This time, it is a super-powered robot which goes by the name of G4, essentially this really badass-looking robot knight, which immediately challenges King to a battle. King says that he has to go to the bathroom because that's the only way that he'll be able to go to 100% of his strength, and that's when we get the big reveal that King is not the strongest person in the world. In fact, he's kind of a little bitch. The big joke of the episode is that King himself is not really strong at all, and he's kind of a coward. Every single time a monster attacks, it's just incidental that he happens to be there, and another hero usually ends up coming in to save the day. And a lot of the times, that actually ends up being Saitama. In fact, King's origins are tied directly to Saitama, and that's all revealed in this episode. You see, King just wants to live a normal life, but he always ends up getting wrapped up in these situations. There's a flashback sequence where he's being attacked by this really goofy looking octopus monster, which is actually responsible for giving him the scars on his face, but we get to see that this is when Saitama actually saves him. This is a pre-bald Saitama, by the way. And by some miracle, somehow he ended up becoming this really popular hero, especially with the public. Everybody loves King. The dude even has his own action figures. So King, knowing that he stands absolutely no chance against this giant robot, basically just decides to make a quick retreat. He goes to the video game store to pick up a dating sim game and returns to his apartment with his tail between his legs, knowing that eventually this whole thing is just gonna blow over. Saitama, of course, could absolutely wreck this robot, and Genos decides that he's going to take it on himself as he needs to get stronger, and that's when we get our first major action scene for the season, and it looks pretty good. I mean, it's not as good as anything from the first season, but like I said, it's not bad either. It's still really exciting, flashy, and explosive. That and the fact that watching Genos actually fight is really great, because he always has a lot of cool weapons all over his cyborg body, and he uses his rocket fist a lot in this episode to trick this robot, causing it to eventually melt down into nothing before it's revealed that there's actually another smaller robot inside which sort of acts as the pilot, or as Genos calls it, its true form. And that's when the true battle begins, with it firing directional lasers all over the place, with him dodging and utilizing his environment, that and using a very conveniently placed fire hydrant to take this thing down. And just like every other battle that Genos gets into, he gets extremely damaged with large chunks of his body being destroyed. He even returns to go see his professor, who's going to heal him up yet again. Genos still has the same mission, which is to go after this mysterious cyborg which has been rampaging. I don't know when that's going to come to fruition, but again, it did a good job of establishing the character and how he's got this really great devil-may-care attitude, and he simply just wants to get stronger. So if you were hoping that the action was going to look good, good news. It is pretty damned exciting. But even with that, I think the best parts of this episode were the interactions between Saitama and King. Saitama actually goes to King's apartment, and this is a really great moment, as this is when he learns that King is not really all that strong in the first place, and he seems to have this, like, weird magnetism to super dangerous monsters. It's just something that's always been kind of unique about his character. In fact, a giant destructive bird monster just slams right into his apartment, and luckily Saitama is able to stop it at the last second, obliterating it in one blast, of course. And this is when King confesses to Saitama that he's not really all that powerful, he's never really been a really great superhero, and ultimately, he's a coward. And interestingly enough, Saitama actually decides to take this character under his wing, for reasons I can't seem to explain. Maybe he feels pity for the guy, or maybe he just really loves the fact that he is a symbol of hope for the people of the city. Something that Saitama desperately wants to be himself, and he basically just ends up making friends with King, and now they hang out casually and play video games. The episode ends with the introduction of 3 brand new heroes and the return of a classic villain from the very first season, Sonic, the super-powered badass ninja. It looks like the Hero Association is actually about to hire some low-level villains to actually join the organization, because suddenly, monsters are just popping up out of freaking nowhere. It's like Power Rangers in this universe, and they need all the help that they can get. Sonic, of course, isn't interested unless it involves Saitama, so he decides to get the hell out of Dodge. And we're introduced to these 3 other characters who seem like they're going to be pretty cool. There's Heavy Tank Loincloth, who's basically like a ripoff of Zangief from Street Fighter, who has a really slick-looking mustache. We also have Magic Man, who kind of looks like a superhero version of Tuxedo Mask from Sailor Moon. And then, of course, we have Blue Fire, whose abilities, I'm assuming, are blue fire. But Sonic's not the only one who is actually looking for Saitama. We also get the return of Blizzard, a character who made a very small appearance in the very first season. And, you know, I don't read the manga version, but I've had enough spoilers thrown at me. I know that this is Tatsumaki's sister, and she also seems to have some psychic powers, and she's also very interested in Saitama as well. So I'm pretty on board to see what's actually going to be happening next, and that's when the episode ends. What's the rundown on the first episode of the second season of One Punch Man? I can honestly say I was like setting myself up for disappointment for this episode. I think a lot of people were. That first trailer wasn't well animated, it was poorly put together, and honestly, it didn't get me excited for the season. But this episode was really exciting. It sort of gave me everything that I love about this show, which is its over-the-top action, its crazy monster battles, and the fact that it really just has a really damn good sense of humor. This episode was eye-opening to say the least, especially with the character of King, who at the end of the first season I was like, oh man, they're building this guy up to be so freaking awesome. I cannot wait to see what King is gonna do, what his powers are gonna be, and he ends up being a little bitch. And instead of being disappointed, I actually thought it was really damn funny, and the fact that Saitama made friends with this guy. He's this big, bulky dude with scars all over his face who plays dating sims. He's a glorified otaku, and that alone makes this episode worth checking out. Not for the action, but for the comedy. It works so well. The creator of the One Punch Man Series 1 is really great at creating comedic moments, and I think his timing when it comes to comedy is always just really freaking solid. You can see that a lot in this series, you can see it a lot in his other series, Mob Psycho 100. And I have a feeling people are going to be comparing this season to that one, but still they're incomparable. That being said, I still think that this episode sort of captured everything that is One Punch Man, and rather than just shit on the episode for having like a completely different production staff and a new director, I have to say, the first episode was still carrying all of the spirit of everything that is One Punch Man. I loved the action, I loved the comedy, and I love all of the characters. Even the new ones, I am pumped for this season. And even with that, I still think that this is going to be a pretty successful season. I think people are going to be really excited for this one. And like I said, it's not that bad looking. It actually looks pretty good. There were only a few moments that I thought were sort of poorly done. I have to admit, I'm not liking the CG gloss of Genos' armor as much. It seemed a little less subdued in the very first season, and there's one shot towards the end where he's talking to the professor, where you get to see like all the inner workings of his body, and it's all kind of dark and not very detailed, but that's like a minor nitpick. Otherwise, I loved this episode, and I loved all of the stuff with King. I got a lot of laughs, I loved the action. What more can I say? I liked this episode. So, I'm going to give the very first episode of the second season, get ready for this, a solid 5 out of 5. If I had any complaints about this episode, they would be superficial at best. The story is still good, the animation is still decent, and I cannot wait to see more. But you got my thoughts on the episode, I want to get yours. Tell me what you thought about the very first episode of Season 2 of One Punch Man! Did you like the episode? Do you not like the episode? What do you think of the new animation staff and direction? Did you have a favorite scene from this episode? And what do you hope to see from the rest of the second season? Let's just get a discussion going all about this episode in the comment section below. I will see you guys next time, and as always, stay down there, baby.